No, my hi to my welcome. It's really lovely to have you all here for our Navigating the Disability System conversation. I'm Ainsley. I'm the CEO and the founder of Flying Kites, and you're going to have to listen to me talk for the next kind of half hour. And as I said, what we're going to do, I'm going to run you through some content about how to navigate the disability system, how it's structured, how it works. And then we'll have a space to kind of have one-on-one, well, not one-on-one, but a group conversation about your specific questions after that. So the plan for our conversation is we're going to talk about the structure of the disability system. So by that I mean kind of how it's funded, where the money flows through, all the different parts of the government that feed into it. We're going to talk about NASCs, what they do, their criteria. We're going to talk specifically about individualised funding a little bit, and we're going to talk about the changes that the government have talked about coming for 2026 and what they might mean, because we're still a little bit unsure about those. So if you don't know very much about Flying Kites, because there's lots of new faces here today, Flying Kites is a little organisation. We do a couple of main things. We help people find amazing support staff. So we're not an agency that employs staff and sends you someone. What we do is that you tell us about the right staff for you, and we will specifically go and find those people for you to then hire and manage. We do goal planning and navigation, and so that is us helping you with whatever it is that you're stuck on. That can be about goals that you're working on, moving out of home, changing something about your life, just trying to get unstuck. And that can be anything from a one-off kind of support to ongoing support and kind of resourcing. And we also have a range of free resources, and I'm going to talk about a few of those this evening, but particularly around individualized funding. And we've got a big website resource called Moving Out that's all about people kind of creating independent living scenarios. So that's Flying Kites, and that's what we do. I did just see a question in the chat pop up saying, can you ask questions in the chat? And the answer is yes, but I probably can't pay attention to them. See, look at that. I just tried to do something and I jumped out of what I was trying to do. So I will, if it's a good way to note your questions as we go through, and then I'll come back to them probably once I finish talking. Otherwise, my brain scatters a little bit if I haven't kind of got periods to stop and talk to you about your questions. So do pop them in the chat, but know that I'll get back to them at the end. So we're going to talk about the government system first. And so that is this conversation about how does the money come through? Where do we fit within the bigger plan of the government? So in my little picture, if you can see it, we've got the New Zealand government at the top, and then it's like an organizational chart. There's a whole lot of different ministries, and theoretically, they all have a responsibility to the disability community, but specifically places like ACC and the Ministry of Education, Oranga Tamariki, they have specific pieces of the community that they serve or particular ways that they help the disabled community. Te Whatu Ora, Health New Zealand, they also provide a lot of support that all New Zealanders need, but they have particular obligations to people with disabilities. But historically, all disability support services sat within Health New Zealand. So we used to be part of Health New Zealand as a wider organisation. And then what they did was they decided that wasn't particularly working, and so they separated out disability support services, and they created the new ministry, which is Whaikaha, the Ministry of Disabled People. So they moved all disability support services out of health and into Whaikaha, and then they decided that that wasn't working either. And so now disability support services sit within the Ministry of Social Development. So that's how it looks at kind of that ministerial level. What that practically looks like for people using the system is that we engage with a needs assessment service coordination service in most of the country. If you live in mid-central, so kind of Palmerston Northish, you have Whaikaha, which has completely replaced the needs assessment service coordination, the NASC. So if you're in that area, the terminology that they use is mana Whaikaha. And if you're in Waikato and Christchurch, there is a NASC, but there is also the Enabling Good Lives demonstrations, which work for a portion of the population. So in Christchurch, It's only for people who meet a criteria when they're leaving school. And in Waikato, it's for a fixed number of people, and that list of people is kind of limited to certain numbers. And so there's not a lot of churn. There's not a lot of new people who get into that system at the moment. So what that looks like from a user's perspective is that you have one door into the disability system, and that is through your NASC, or the alternatives through EGL. So in each region, there is only one NASC. There isn't a choice that you get to make. There is one door in which you can go through. So how that, what that looks like when you line it up, and then you realize that the language that we use around this stuff is really confusing. So the Ministry of Social Development holds the funds from the government. They're given a set amount of budget that they're allowed to spend on buying disability support services for disabled people. Within the Ministry of Social Development, they've created a department called the Disability Support Services Department, which is DSS. So MSD holds the money in DSS, which is the Disability Support Services, and then DSS contracts needs assessment service coordination services to engage with disabled people directly. So you get lots of beautiful acronyms just to make life really confusing. But what it practically means is that there's this kind of tiered process where the government has said, here is how much money there is. And then DSS has got to find a way to work out what each disabled person needs and how they should divide up that money through what contracts to be able to get disabled people receiving services. And then the NASCs can only allocate services to a range of disability organisations that have a contract with DSS. So there's a whole wide range of different contracts, and we'll talk about those in a bit. But what they mean is that you can't just buy anything you like. The NASCs can only allocate out particular services to particular people that meet criteria. So, as I said before, there was this change that it went from the Ministry of Health to Whaikaha, the Ministry of Disabled People. And then in March 2024, I'm sure most of you know that really unexpectedly, they announced that Whaikaha was not financially viable and they were going to have to make some really significant changes to how the disability system worked and what people could purchase. And that's where those big individualised funding changes came. And that's where the big limit on people entering residential services came from. In September 2024, they decided that services would move from Whaikaha into the Ministry of Social Development, and they set up a task force to try and create a better way forward for the disability system. In September this year, they've announced that there are more changes coming in 2026. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what they look like. But they're changing again what individualised funding and flexible supports look like. And they're also making some changes to the NASC process. I just really like to talk about the Enabling Good Lives principles. They're getting a little bit lost in how services are developing at the moment and the contracts and things like that. And so for me, it's really important to go back to every disability support organisation that has a contract with disability services has signed up to these principles. They have promised that they will behave in a way that is person-centred, that is mana enhancing, that is easy to use. And it's just really valuable to note that you can use that in conversation with organisations when you need them to behave in a way that's actually going to help you in your world. Sometimes just talking about your goals, talking about the impact of whatever decision they're making in relation to these principles can be really helpful in making sure that they understand that they have promised to do something, and if they're not doing it, they can be held to account for it. Unfortunately, they've put out a draft disability strategy for New Zealand, and these principles haven't made it into that cut. So we're hoping that it will be in the final version, but that those principles are embedded in all disability support services. What they look like in practice varies, but they have all promised to behave this way. So when it comes to the criteria for accessing services, so this is the NASC's job, is to ensure that the people who are coming into a needs assessment all meet these criteria. And bizarrely, they're really vague. There are more details that the NASCs have built into their contracts, but from the public perspective, this is pretty much all we get to see. And this says that the disability is going to last more than 6 months, that people who come into the system need ongoing support to live independently. And it talks about kind of specific services, specific disabilities or kind of qualities that get people in or out of the system. So it's specifically for people under 65, or at least entering the system when they're under 65. Some people, when they turn 65 but are already within disability services, can stay there. But aged services have their own NASC and their own process. Some things like autism meets the criteria to automatically get a needs assessment. Doesn't mean you get a service, but it means you automatically get an assessment. Um, and but some neurological conditions and things like that can give you access or cannot give you access depending on a whole range of circumstances that are not clearly published anywhere. So it's important, as I said before, to note that autism gives you automatic eligibility to the system, automatic eligibility to get a needs assessment, but not anyone who meets the criteria does not necessarily receive any support. That's a different conversation. The eligibility to have an assessment is not eligibility to they find that you have a need that they can meet. And it's important to note that there's other things that people assume will automatically get you into the system that don't. So things like fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, ADHD, dyslexia, kind of brain aneurysms, and there's all sorts of things that you would think would create eligibility into the system that don't automatically do that. And the other thing that's really important to note is that they are only allocating for the disability part of your needs. They think the system is designed as though your disability is in one box and your health needs are in another box, and your mental health needs and your family needs and all the other stuff that's going on all fit in individual boxes, and they're only interested in the disability related piece. And what's really important to note there is that when you talk to a NASC about your situation, we often use language that sounds like it's about something else. So people talk about stimming behavior in relation to anxiety, or people say that it's that's their OCD behavior and things like that. And every time you say those things, the NASC goes, cool, well, that's a mental health concern. That is not a disability related concern. And so they don't allocate you support for those things that you have just flippantly called anxiety. So it's just really important to note when you have a needs assessment to just be very clear about the words that you use. That if there isn't a diagnosis of anxiety or OCD, then don't use those words if you can avoid them, because they're probably limiting your access into the system because they're trying to put things into their neat little boxes. The other thing that's really important that people aren't getting told early enough is that there is growing need for an intellectual disability diagnosis for people that applies to. Historically, young people were being diagnosed with GDD, which is Global Developmental Disorder, when they were very young. And if there was no question about an intellectual disability, they were never getting tested to see if they had an intellectual disability, to have it proven on a piece of paper. But now, when those young people become adults, the NASC is frequently asking for that piece of paper that says that you now have an intellectual disability as an adult, because a global developmental delay is a child-only diagnosis. So if that applies to you, it's just really valuable to know that before you get discharged from pediatrician services, before you stop talking to the psychologist or whomever you were engaging with when they were young, that it's really valuable to ask them if they can put in writing that this young person has an intellectual disability, because otherwise there's lots of stories of people having to pay for private assessments when that young person becomes 18, because suddenly there's no proof they have a disability, which seems really bizarre, but is a growing concern that I want people to know about. So, this is just a little bit about NASCs and making sure that you understand that I've talked about Mid-Central, Waikato and Christchurch have a different system within Enabling Good Lives. But what happens is that each NASC is given a fixed amount of money for their region, and it's not well proportioned to the number of disabled people in that community. We hope that that might be part of what they're going to fix and some of the changes that are coming with NASC. But at the moment, it's based on what they spent last year. So there isn't kind of a population, there is some degree of population control and spend kind of assessments, but systemically, it's not actually fair and even across the country based on the number of people and the needs of those people in each region. So theoretically, you get a needs assessment every 3 to 5 years. And they've told us that the process is going to get more consistent moving forward with some changes that are coming to NASC. So what I often find is that I talk to people and they want to know kind of what services are out there. People don't know what they're eligible for. They don't know how, whether or not they're getting the thing that they're most wanting. So there's actually hundreds of contracts from DSS. They contract all sorts of different things with all sorts of different providers. They're not consistent across every region. But generally, the top half of this little picture is things that are kind of more applicable to kids, people living at home with their parents, and the bottom half is more people in that kind of adult independence kind of world. So young children, most often they get carer support. And it starts the left-hand side is the kind of less support to more support kind of continuum. So most young people, they get something like carer support, and that's supposed to be a little bit of respite. But there is also, in some places, a contract called home support. In some places, there are contracted school holiday programs and after-school programs even that exist that are worth asking your NASC about, because they're often a small anomaly that people don't always know about, but they can be really fantastic. Home and community support is more about personal care and household management for young people. It exists in older people as well. And then you're moving on to things like individualized funding and out-of-home respite. As I say, there'll be some quirky things in the region you live in, but generally those are the kind of main services that are offered for young people. In that kind of adult independence space, there's the home and community support, which is the practical help. Show up, help you shower, show up, do your cleaning for people who need help to physically do those tasks. Individualized funding is the same across different age groups, but how it's allocated changes as people age. Supported independent living is a contract that is available across the country, and it's supposed to be about skill building. It's supposed to be about the skills that you need to be able to do a task independently. There isn't a fixed amount of time that you need to be able to learn that task in, but it's to do things like learn how to catch the bus, learn how to cook, and often a NASC may not notice when you become a young adult and you move into a space where you want to build those skills up. So people have been getting individualized funding and they just kind of stay in that place. But supported independent living is allocated for different criteria, and therefore you can have that as well as your individualized funding. It is an organisation that will come and they will provide you a staff member to help with those goals specifically. It's not overly flexible, but it is a really helpful thing if you're trying to create independence or you're moving out of home and need someone to come and help you with that morning routine or doing the cooking or supermarket shopping, with the hope that you can do that more independently over time. There is out-of-home respite for adults. It's few and far between often, but it does exist. In some regions, Auckland, Waikato, Hutt Valley, Southland, Otago, you've got choice and community living, which is supposed to be the bit between supported living and residential care, where it's a lot more complicated to organise. It's more like an individualised funding budget, but you have to have an agency help you. But it does create a lot more flexibility to live where you like and how you like. And then residential care, which is the only service really that is set up to ensure that you have someone with you 24 hours a day. All the rest of them are supposed to be just a piece of your day. And residential care is the only one with the backup and expectation that there is always support if you need it. And then there's things like equipment services and all sorts of other pieces, behaviour support that sit alongside these. But often people don't understand the spectrum of support that's available, the range of contracts that's out there. And I think that it's just like when you kind of see them laid out and you're like, that theoretically, loosely, is from less support to more support. You can kind of imagine where you might need to be on your journey of becoming an adult, living life how you want to live it. So that is worth knowing. Then this is restating the same things. The most common outcomes are individualized funding, carer support, home and community support, probably. But it's worth knowing that these things are out there. And unfortunately, in the regions where you don't have certain contracts, there is nothing your NASC can do about it. Well, almost always nothing your NASC can do about it. There are always exceptions to every rule. There are people with huge supported living budgets. There are people with huge individualised funding budgets. There are people who have services outside of the regions that are supposed to have them, but they're really, really rare. And so most often, if you, for example, wanted choice in community living, but you lived in Northland, there's not much that the NASC up there can do without special petitionings and years worth of fights to make it happen. So the government have said there are going to be changes next year. And so the key parts of those changes that you need to know about is that they are removing the purchasing rules that came in March 2024. So they're going back, we think, to those previous purchasing guidelines and the rules on no travel, the rules on no items that are not handheld sensory items, all of those things are getting taken away. And instead, what's happening is that your budget is going to be based on the personal plan that you're going to have. And we don't yet know what the personal plan is going to look like. But it's going to be a lot more flexible again. It seems that there's going to be a defined list of things that need pre-approval. And so they've said international travel and high value items are going to be in there, like you need to send that off to somebody or other to approve. And Enabling Good Lives in Mid-Central and in Christchurch have decided that they would like to adopt these new changes. And Enabling Good Lives Waikato is still undecided about what they're going to do. But so this is really important if you are using a service like individualized funding, where you are struggling to buy what you need to buy, there will be some flexibility coming back. So practically, what does that timeline look like? On the 1st of February, anyone who's new into the NASC system will get the new assessments and the new version of the system. Between the 1st of February and the 1st of October, anyone who's due for a reassessment just won't get one. They're just going to skip over reassessments for people because they're really busy trying to get this new way of working up and running. People who have flexible funding, like individualized funding and enhanced individualized funding, choice in community living, those people will get a budget that is based on their spending from June 2023 to June 2025. The purchasing rules are going to be removed from the 1st of April. And I guess we are assuming that when your date comes up for renewal, that your new budget will be based on that spending from that 2-year period. And then from the 1st of October, they'll start doing those assessments from then, and the people will get these new personal plans to base their funding off, to base their spending off, and the IF hosts will use that personal plan to decide what is and isn't an acceptable use of your funding. So a lot of it hinges on what is this personal plan? What does that look like? How's that going to work? And from what I've heard, the IF hosts haven't seen it yet. So it's a bit of an unknown of what that's going to practically mean for people. So I've talked about all this like you know what individualized funding is. But I'm just going to dig into it for a little bit. There is a summary on our website, a little individualized funding resource that you might like to look at if you're new to individualized funding or debating if it's something you want. And it just kind of summarizes how it works. But I guess more now than historically, people are aware that there are 3 ways that you get individualized funding for personal care, which is the looking after your body, showering, brushing your teeth, chopping your nails. For household management, which is keeping your house inside clean. They don't care about your gardens, and helping with meals and things like that. And then respite is the things that give the main caregiver a break. And they've gotten more and more strict at the moment about who needs a break in those circumstances and making sure that there is actually a person getting that respite, rather than just a person who, yeah, I guess sometimes there were people who were quite independent who were getting respite allocated. So you pick one of 10 individualized funding hosts, and there are 10 and they really vary. So doing some homework about what's the right option for you is really valuable. At the moment, that IF host helps you write a goal plan, and those goal plans are often presented as quite trivial, but that is how they make their decisions about what you're going to be able to spend your funding on, and they're going to be more and more important moving forward. In the future, those plans will likely be done by the NASC. The IF host might not have to do that piece of work, but that's at the moment it is actually quite important that you get the right things put in there and that they're nice, broad goals. And then the IF host's role is to make sure you follow those purchasing rules and that you're understanding and you're following the rules of individualized funding as you go. And so the other piece that people often get confused about if they're new to individualized funding is that the budget is only available for that 12 months. So what you spend up until the day it renews, and then whatever money you haven't spent disappears and you get a new allocation of money. One of the misinterpretations that often exists is people perceive that the individualized funding host has your money, and that when you ask for the money, the individualized funding host kind of goes into their back room and finds the money that they've already got for you and they give it to you. And that if you don't spend it, the individualized funding host keeps it. But that's not how it works. What happens is the government has your money, the Ministry of Social Development has your money, and then what happens is that as you spend it, you go to the host and you say, hey, host, I spent $1,000 last week. Can I have it now? And they'll give you the $1,000, and then they go back to the government and ask the government for their allocation of that $1,000 back. So they've paid you, and then they get paid by the government. So they're certainly not sitting on your pools of money, asking to waiting for you to ask for it, and they don't get any extra money depending on how much you spend. They're paid a fixed amount of money, and that's their fixed amount of money for the whole 12-month period that they work with you. This is our little table about the individualized funding hosts, and why it's important is if you're not happy with your host or you're doing individualized funding for the first time, it just talks about some key things. So people don't necessarily know that the hosts vary in size. Some of them support less than 100 clients, and the biggest one supports more than 10,000. Some of them work nationwide, some of them don't. Some of them have fancy apps, some of them don't. Some of them charge, the cheapest is $3.45 a fortnight for payroll, and some of them charge $20, $30, $32 for payroll. Depends what you care about and what host is the right host for you. So I'm nearly done, I promise. Preparing for the 2026 changes, it's just, I think, if you are worried about what those changes are going to mean for you, you can still talk to your host and talk to your NASC. There's lots of worry at the moment about people who didn't spend a lot in 2023 and 24. So they 24 and 25. So they are worried that they're now not going to get enough budget moving forward. They are open to exceptions. It's just likely to be quite a wait and a palaver to get yourself those needs met during that changing period. And so I guess it's just you knowing that you can raise that question and do talk to them early if you've got a reason that it happened, if you know that it's not going to work. But the exciting thing is that we get some more change and some more flexibility in place, which is really cool. And so then the other piece is just, I guess, thinking about that plan. That plan is going to be really important and making sure you're setting some nice, strong but vague goals. You don't want any goals that say, I'm going to do this on Tuesdays. Because if the class changes or the need changes to Wednesdays, your goal is not going to be applicable anymore. So you want some nice solid goals that are flexible for your changing needs. This is just a list of websites that are out there that might be worth you talking to. Looking at. The first couple are lists of organizations, resources that are out there. They're just kind of helpful if you're looking for who could help me with my problem. Care Matters, Complex Care, Carers New Zealand are good places to go if you're looking for that kind of advocacy community of other people who are in your situation. Aotearoa is a Pacifica-specific organisation, so they have a disability information contract to help Pacific people navigate the disability system. And then the disabilitysupport.gov.nz is the MSD disability support website that has a copy of every contract that disability providers have with the government. It has a copy of the purchasing rules if you can interpret them. But that one is supposed to be the point of truth, that the people who are making decisions are using that information off that site. And then the last bit is just that one of the things we've just launched is a resource about moving out of home. And so what that is it's a step-by-step guide designed to provide a whole lot of information for people who are looking at moving out of home or changing their living situation in some way. So it's a whole lot of information, and then it is worksheets to help you practically think through what that information could mean in your situation. So that's free and it's on our website there for people to use. And because it's new, I just want everyone to know it exists. So if that might be relevant to your situation, do go have a look. And this is Flying Kites is just little. Primarily, it's just me and Sarah who does our recruitment. So you can get hold of us anytime. That's not true, but you can try and get hold of us anytime. And we are usually pretty responsive. And in the same way, I'm going to send you these slides, so you'll have all those details. You don't need to write them down.